High Scholar Myrth watched her world die from the observation tower. The once bright sun flickered like a dying ember, casting strange shadows across the crumbling cities below. Her people, the Valrine, had known this day would come for months now, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. "Any responses to our distress signals?" she asked without turning. Her assistant, young Pella, checked the communications array again. "None, Scholar. The Carthene Empire acknowledged our transmission but refused to help. The Luminous Collective said they cannot interfere with natural stellar events. The Galactic Assembly sent an official statement of sympathy." Sympathy? Myrth would have laughed if she had the energy. Her people had spent centuries cataloging knowledge from across the galaxy, freely sharing medical databases, scientific discoveries, and cultural archives with anyone who asked. Now, when they needed help, the galaxy offered words instead of action. "How many evacuation ships do we have operational?" Myrth asked. 17, enough to save maybe 5,000 people, Pella's voice cracked. Out of 3 million. The numbers were impossible. Impossible to process, impossible to accept. Myrth had already decided she would not be among those saved. Her granddaughter Pella would go, along with the other young ones who could rebuild their civilization somewhere, somehow. The communications array suddenly chirped with an incoming transmission. Pella rushed to check it. "Scholar, we have a response. It's from Earth." Earth, Myrth searched her memory. The humans, but they barely achieved faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. They are still classified as a developing species. "The transmission says they received our distress call." Pella's hands trembled as she read the message. "They're sending ships. 7 vessels are already en route, estimated arrival in 43 hours. Myrth felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope, but it was quickly tempered by reality. 7 ships cannot save us all, and humans, they barely have resources for their own colonies. Why would they come? On Earth, Captain Rebecca Stone stood before the United Earth Council, her jaw set in determination. "With respect, Council members, I didn't ask for permission. I asked for support." Council member Harrison frowned. "Captain Stone, humanity is still recovering from the expansion wars. Our colonies are struggling. We cannot afford to mount a rescue operation for an alien species halfway across the galaxy. The Valrine shared their medical databases with us during the Red Fever pandemic," Rebecca said firmly. "500 million humans survived because of their generosity. They asked for nothing in return. Now they're dying, and we're going to debate economics." "The Galactic Assembly has already refused to help," another council member pointed out. "If we interfere, we risk sanctions. We could be isolated from galactic trade." Rebecca leaned forward. "Then let them sanction us. I'll take 7 ships, all volunteers, converted cargo haulers and colony transports. We'll save who we can and bring them back to Outpost Trell. The mining colony has space and can accommodate refugees." Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, Earth's representative to the Galactic Assembly, spoke quietly. "If we do this, Captain, we set a precedent. We tell the galaxy that humanity values life over politics. That might make us enemies among the powerful species. Or it might remind them what civilization actually means," Rebecca replied. The council voted. It was close, but Rebecca got her authorization. 7 ships, all volunteers, no military escort. They would be on their own. Dr. Owen Harris joined the mission immediately. The xenobiologist had studied Valrine culture for years and knew their scientific contributions were irreplaceable. "We need to save the great archives," he insisted. "The data stored there represents knowledge from 200 civilizations. If it's lost, the galaxy loses centuries of accumulated wisdom." The human fleet arrived at the Valrine homeworld with time running out. The sun's collapse was accelerating faster than predicted. They had perhaps 30 hours before the atmosphere would become unbreathable. Myrth stood on the landing platform as the first human ship touched down. The vessel was old, patched in multiple places, clearly a cargo hauler retrofitted for passenger transport. The crew that emerged wore mismatched uniforms and looked exhausted from the journey. Captain Stone approached and offered a formal greeting in carefully practiced Valrine. "Hi, Scholar Myrth, we're here to help." "You came," Myrth's voice broke. "After everyone else refused, you came." "The Valrine saved countless human lives during our plague years," Rebecca said simply. "We don't forget." "Our debts." The evacuation began immediately. Human crews worked alongside Valrine volunteers, loading families onto the ships. The humans shared their own food rations when Valrine supplies ran short. They gave up their crew quarters so more refugees could fit. Owen and his team worked frantically to download the Great Archives. The data storage technology was different from human systems, requiring improvised solutions. Young Pella worked alongside him, guiding the humans through the complex filing systems. "This section contains all the medical research from the Torvan Republic," Pella explained. "And here the luminous collective's star charts. Our people spent generations gathering this." "We'll save it all," Owen promised, "every bite." As the sun's death throes intensified, impossible choices had to be made. Myrth personally selected who would go and who would stay. Families were separated, children crying for parents who had to remain behind. Rebecca's ships were designed to hold maybe 200 passengers each. They loaded 600 onto every vessel. Life support systems strained, food and water rationed to the minimum. The human crews gave their own supplies to Valrine children. Council member Thross, one of the Valrine elders, refused evacuation. "Take the young ones," he told Myrth. "Our generation has lived full lives. Let the future survive." Myrth herself made the same choice. She stayed on the landing platform as the last ship prepared to depart. Pella begged her to come, but Myrth shook her head. "You carry our people's future. I have faith in you, granddaughter." The human fleet escaped with 40,000 Valrine and 90% of the Great Archives as the homeworld sun collapsed completely. From the ship's windows, the survivors watched their planet consumed by stellar fire. Rebecca stood on her ship's command deck, looking at the overcrowded cargo holds filled with traumatized refugees. "Set course for Outpost Trell," she ordered, "and send a message to Governor Murphy. Tell her we're bringing 40,000 new citizens and they're all going to need homes." Behind her, Pella clutched a data crystal containing fragments of the Great Archives. Beside her, a human engineer named Lena offered her water. Neither spoke the other's language fluently yet, but Lena's gentle expression needed no translation. The galaxy had abandoned the Valrine. Humanity had not, and that single choice would echo across the stars for generations to come. 15 years had reshaped Outpost Trell in ways nobody had predicted. What began as a struggling mining colony had transformed into something the galaxy had never witnessed. A true fusion of two species living not as separate communities, but as one people. Lena Stone adjusted the plasma torch and welded another support beam into place. Beside her, Pella calibrated the energy flow using calculations that would have taken human engineers weeks to develop. Together, they completed the work in hours. "Your mother would be proud," Pella said, her Valrine accent barely noticeable after years of speaking human languages. "This shield generator design is brilliant." "It was your equations that made it possible," Lena replied. "Human engineering is just creative stubbornness. You Valrine actually understand the mathematics behind reality." Governor Ann Murphy reviewed the reports from her office overlooking the settlement. Mixed species families walked the streets below. Valrine children attended schools taught by human teachers. Human mechanics worked in shops owned by Valrine entrepreneurs. It was messy, chaotic, and absolutely beautiful. "Governor," her assistant interrupted, "we have a situation. Carthene Empire ships just entered the system." Anne's blood went cold. The Carthene Empire had been expanding aggressively for the past 5 years, conquering neighboring systems and enslaving their populations. Their military doctrine was brutal and efficient. The Carthene war fleet consisted of 15 heavy cruisers and twice that number in support vessels. Against this, Outpost Trell had 3 aging patrol ships and a handful of armed transports. Earth couldn't send reinforcements in time. They were alone. Commander Ralph of the Carthene Empire reviewed the tactical data with satisfaction. This would be quick. The settlement had minimal defenses and was home to a mix of refugees and humans. Conquering it would send a clear message about Carthene power. "Hail the colony," he ordered. "Offer them terms." Anne stood in the communications center when the Carthene ultimatum arrived. Surrender immediately, hand over all Valrine refugees for processing, and accept Carthene governance. Refusal would result in complete destruction. She didn't hesitate. "Send our response. Outpost Trell refuses. We will defend our home." Rebecca Stone now. Admiral Stone, after years of service, arrived on the next supply ship. Her hair was gray now, but her eyes held the same fierce determination. "Tell me we have a plan," she said. Lena and Pella had been working for 72 hours straight. "We might," Lena said. "The Great Archives contain theoretical weapons designs that the Valrine never built. With human engineering, we can make them work." "Theoretical means untested," Rebecca pointed out. "Tested means we already know it works," Pella countered. "Theoretical means we believe it will work, and right now belief is all we have." The entire settlement mobilized. Human welders worked alongside Valrine physicists. Children helped carry supplies while elderly Valrine scholars consulted ancient texts. Everyone contributed something. Young Valrine who had grown up on Outpost Trell volunteered for the defense ships. They had never known their original homeworld, but this place was theirs. They would fight for it. The experimental shield harmonics were based on principles the Valrine had theorized but never tested. The mathematics suggested that properly tuned energy fields could deflect weapons' fire by phase shifting. Humans built the generators using mining equipment and spare parts. "This shouldn't work," one human engineer muttered as they installed the systems. "That's what they said about faster-than-light travel," his Valrine partner replied, "until someone built it anyway." As the Carthene fleet advanced, other species watched. The Luminous Collective sent an observer ship. Officially, they were just monitoring. Unofficially, Diplomat Serene was filing detailed reports about what she witnessed. "They're actually going to fight," she transmitted. 3 outdated ships against a Carthene battle fleet. It's insane." Her superiors asked the obvious question, will they survive? "Doubtful," Serene replied. "But they're not running. The humans and Valrine are standing together. I've never seen anything like it." On the lead defense ship, Lena commanded while Pella coordinated the tactical systems. Around them, the crew was perfectly mixed. Human pilots, Valrine navigators, engineers from both species working the weapons stations. "Carthene fleet is powering weapons," the sensor operator called out. "Activate shield harmonics," Lena ordered. "All ships formation Delta." The Carthene fired first, massive energy beams that should have torn through the defense ships like paper. Instead, the experimental shields flickered to life, and the weapon's fire scattered harmlessly. On his command ship, Ralph stared at his displays in confusion. What just happened? Those shields shouldn't exist, reacquire targets and fire again. The second barrage met the same fate. The human Valrine forces weren't just surviving. They were maneuvering with a precision that Carthene doctrine couldn't predict. Valrine navigators calculated optimal flight paths with mathematical perfection. Human pilots executed those paths with creative improvisation that made the movements unpredictable. Together, they created a fighting style the Carthene had never encountered. "They're adapting," Ralph's tactical officer reported. "The defense pattern uses both logic and chaos. Our targeting systems can't lock on." Ralph called for reinforcements. This should have been routine. Instead, he was facing an opponent that shouldn't be able to resist. Across the galaxy, species that had ignored the Valrine's extinction watched the battle unfold. News networks broadcast the confrontation. Here were humans and Valrine, 2 species written off as insignificant, standing against one of the galaxy's major powers. Inside Outpost Trell, civilians sheltered in reinforced bunkers. Human parents held Valrine children. Valrine elders comforted human families. They were all terrified, but they were terrified together. One of the defense ships took heavy damage when its shield generator overloaded. The human captain ordered evacuation, but the Valrine crew refused to leave their human shipmates. They worked together to jury-rig repairs even as Carthene weapons fire intensified. The battle raged for 6 hours. The human Valrine forces lost 1 ship but inflicted damage on 3 Carthene cruisers. It wasn't victory, but it was survival against impossible odds. Then new ships appeared on the sensors, not Carthene. The Torvan Republic had sent a small fleet. They positioned themselves between the combatants and broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Torvan Republic vessel Steadfast. We are here to observe. Any species that attacks will face diplomatic consequences." Routh received urgent messages from Carthene High Command. The political situation had changed. Too many species were watching. Conquest of Outpost Trell was no longer worth the cost. He ordered his fleet to withdraw, but this wasn't over. The Carthene Empire didn't accept defeat. As the Carthene ships retreated, exhausted defenders returned to Outpost Trell. They had survived barely, but everyone knew the Carthene would return with greater force. Rebecca gathered the senior officers. "We bought time, now we use it. The galaxy is watching. We need to show them what we're fighting for." Lena and Pella stood together on the observation deck, looking at their damaged home. "We can't keep doing this," Lena said quietly. "Then we change the rules," Pella replied. "The galaxy operates on fear and power. We show them something different." Below them, human and Valrine crews worked side by side, repairing damage and preparing for the next battle. They were exhausted, scared, but united. What they had built on Outpost Trell was worth defending, and the galaxy was finally starting to notice. The Galactic Assembly Chamber erupted in chaos as Ambassador Yuki Tanaka finished presenting humanity's formal complaint. 47 species representatives shouted over each other, protocols forgotten in the heat of the moment. "Order," the Assembly Speaker called, her voice barely audible. "I demand order." The Carthene delegation sat smugly in their section. They had powerful allies and economic leverage. Most species feared them too much to intervene. They assumed this debate would end like all others, with words instead of action. Then Pella walked to the central platform. She was young for a Valrine, barely 30 Earth years old, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. The chamber slowly fell silent. "I was 12 when my world died," she began. "I watched my grandmother choose to stay behind so I could live. I held my mother's hand as our sun collapsed." She paused. The galaxy watched. Nobody came. Representatives shifted uncomfortably. Several looked away. "Except humanity," Pella continued. "They had almost nothing. Their ships were old, their colonies struggling, but they came anyway. They saved 40,000 of my people when the powerful species of this assembly offered only sympathy." She pulled out a data crystal. "This contains records from the Great Archives. It shows that 600 years ago the Carthene Empire faced extinction from a stellar plague. Do you know who saved them?" The Carthene delegation went rigid. "The Arendi," Pella said. "A species that no longer exists. The Arendi spent their resources saving Carthene refugees, and when the Arendi faced their own crisis a century later, the galaxy watched them die." She looked directly at the Carthene representatives, including those they had saved. The revelation spread through the chamber like fire. The Carthene had buried this history, but the Great Archives remembered everything. On Outpost Trell, repairs continued at frantic pace. Carthene reinforcements were gathering. The next assault would be overwhelming. "We've got maybe 3 days," Lena told the engineering teams. "The shield generators held last time, but barely. We need improvements." A human mechanic named Derek raised his hand. "What if we don't just defend?" The archives mention adaptive offensive systems. Valrine theory combined with human power sources might create something unexpected. Pella, watching the discussion via communication link from the assembly, smiled. Even separated by light years, the human-Valrine partnership continued innovating. Young Carthene officer Dren sat in his quarters aboard Ralph's flagship, reading the historical records that Pella had revealed. His hands shook. Everything he had been taught about Carthene's superiority was built on lies and forgotten debts. Officer Dren, his communicator buzzed. Report to Commander Ralph immediately. Ralph was studying tactical displays when Dren arrived. We attack in 72 hours, the commander said. This time we bring enough force to guarantee victory. The Empire has committed its full regional fleet. Commander, Dren said carefully, have you reviewed the historical records about the Arendi? Ancient history is irrelevant, Ralph snapped. We are Carthene, we are strong, that is what matters. The Arendi saved our ancestors, Dren pressed. And we abandoned them. Now we're doing the same thing to Outpost Trell that the galaxy did to the Arendi. Dismissed, officer, Ralph's voice was ice. Do not raise this subject again. But Dren wasn't alone. Across the Carthene fleet, young officers were reading the same histories. Doubt spread like infection. The Luminous Collective held an emergency council session. Serene presented her complete observations. The human-Valrine integration isn't just military cooperation, she explained. They've created a genuinely unified culture, families, schools, government, all truly shared. And you believe this is significant? A council elder asked. I believe it's unprecedented, Serene replied. In all recorded galactic history, no two species have merged like this. Most alliances are political or economic. This is different. They've chosen to become one people. After hours of debate, the Luminous Collective made an announcement that shocked the galaxy. They were extending protected status to Outpost Trell. Any military action against the settlement would carry severe diplomatic consequences. It wasn't military intervention, but it was something. For the first time, the collective was taking a moral stand. The Torvan Republic went further. They formally recognized Outpost Trell as an independent sovereign entity and offered defensive alliance. 3 other minor species followed suit. Ralph received the news with barely controlled fury. They're making this political, he told his officers. The Empire wants conquest, but they're forcing us to consider consequences. Then we make it quick, his second-in-command suggested. One overwhelming strike, destroy the settlement before political pressure can build further. It was decided. The Carthene would launch one final massive assault. If they succeeded quickly, they could present the galaxy with accomplished facts. If they failed, they would withdraw and claim they were merely conducting military exercises. On Outpost Trell, defenders worked around the clock. The new adaptive weapon systems were ready, untested, theoretical, and possibly their only chance. Governor Murphy addressed the settlement. The Carthene are coming with everything they have. We've received pledges of support from allies, but they're too far away to help in time. This battle will decide our fate. She looked across the crowd. Human and Valrine faces, young and old, all determined. 15 years ago, strangers became family. Refugees became citizens. 2 species became one people. The galaxy doesn't understand what we've built because they've never seen it before, so we show them. We stand together and we survive together. The crowd erupted in unified cheers. Languages mixed together, human and Valrine voices blending. Rebecca Stone stood with Lena and Pella on the command ship. I'm too old for this, she muttered. You're exactly the right age, Pella replied. You saved my people once, now we save each other. The Carthene fleet arrived right on schedule, 43 warships, the largest force Ralph had ever commanded. Against them, Outpost Trell had 5 operational combat vessels in desperation. This is Commander Ralph of the Carthene Empire. The transmission came. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. You have 1 hour. Governor Murphy's response was broadcast on every frequency. "This is Governor Ann Murphy of Outpost Trell. We are a free people, human and Valrine together. We will not surrender. We will not submit. And we will not be divided. Come if you must, but know that you face something your empire has never encountered. A people who fight not from fear, but from love." Across the Carthene fleet, officers who had read the Arendi histories felt those words differently than their commander intended. They were facing exactly what their own ancestors had once been: refugees fighting for survival. Ralph gave the order to attack. But as Carthene weapons powered up, something unexpected happened. 3 Carthene ships broadcast on internal channels. "This is Officer Dren of the vessel Relentless. We will not fire on refugees. We will not repeat the mistakes that killed the Arendi. Any ship that wishes to stand down, join us." The Carthene fleet fractured. Some ships held position, others moved to attack, and some, inspired by remembered debts, did nothing. Ralph watched his perfect assault dissolve into chaos. He had overwhelming force, but suddenly he wasn't sure how to use it. The galaxy watched, and everything changed. Commander Ralph had commanded fleets for 20 years. He had conquered 12 systems and never faced a moment of doubt. Now, watching his own ships refuse orders, he felt something unfamiliar: uncertainty. "Officer Dren has committed mutiny," his tactical officer reported. 7 ships are holding position and refusing to engage. 4 more are requesting clarification of orders. "Clarification?" Ralph's voice was dangerous. "I ordered attack. What requires clarification?" But even as he spoke, he knew the answer. His officers weren't confused about the order. They were questioning its morality. That Valrine girl had weaponized history, and now it was tearing his fleet apart. On Outpost Trell, defenders watched the Carthene fleet with confusion. "Are they fighting each other?" Lena asked. "Some of them are refusing to attack," Pella said, analyzing the communications intercepts. "Dren's message about the Arendi, it's spreading through their ranks." Rebecca understood. Immediately, they're having a crisis of conscience. Right now, some of those Carthene officers are realizing they're about to become the villains in someone else's history. The moment hung in perfect tension. One side preparing to defend, the other divided about whether to attack. Then Ralph made his choice. "All loyal ships ignore the traitors, focus fire on the settlement, maximum weapons, we end this now." 23 Carthene warships opened fire simultaneously. The human Valrine defenders activated their shield harmonics and dove into defensive patterns they had practiced 1,000 times. The experimental adaptive weapons went live. Based on Valrine mathematical predictions and human engineering improvisation, they analyzed incoming fire, calculated weak points, and responded with precisely targeted counterstrikes. A Carthene heavy cruiser took a direct hit to its power core. The ship didn't explode, but it went dark, drifting. Another ship lost its weapons array. A third had its engines damaged. "How are they doing this?" Ralph demanded. "They have 5 ships against 23. His tactical officer provided the analysis. "Their weapons adapt in real time. Every shot they fire is optimized based on our shield frequencies. It's like they're learning as they fight." It was exactly what they were doing. Human pilots provided instinct and adaptability. Valrine scientists calculated and optimized. Together, they created a fighting force that evolved mid-battle. But numbers still mattered. The defenders were taking damage. One ship lost shields completely and had to withdraw. Another suffered critical hull breaches. Crews struggled to keep systems operational. Inside the settlement, civilians huddled in shelters. Human children held Valrine younglings. Elderly from both species shared what comfort they could. "I'm scared," a young human girl whispered to her Valrine friend. "Me too," the Valrine child replied, grasping the human's hand. "But we're scared together, that makes it better." On the mutinous Carthene ships, Dren faced a choice. Standing down was one thing, actively helping was another. But watching the battle, seeing the human Valrine forces fighting so desperately, he made his decision. All ships willing to act, he broadcast. Target the loyalist vessels, fire on my mark. The 7 rebel ships opened fire on their former comrades. The Carthene fleet descended into complete chaos. Loyalist ships trying to attack Outpost Trell while also defending against the rebels. Rebels trying to protect the settlement while fighting their own people. Ralph roared in fury, "Destroy the traitors first, we'll deal with the settlement after." But the damage was done. His overwhelming advantage had evaporated. Instead of a simple conquest, he was commanding a 3-way battle that made no tactical sense. Across the galaxy, species watched in amazement. The Galactic Assembly called emergency session after emergency session. Nothing like this had ever happened. A fleet fracturing from internal moral conflict during active combat. "We must intervene," the Torvan delegate insisted. "On whose side?" another species asked. "The Carthene loyalists, the rebels, the humans, and Valrine." Ambassador Tanaka stood. "On the side of what's right. Outpost Trell asked only to be left alone. They threaten no one. They simply want to exist. If this assembly cannot protect that most basic desire, then what purpose does it serve?" The vote was called. By narrow margin, the assembly passed an emergency resolution. All military action near Outpost Trell must cease immediately. Peacekeeping forces would be dispatched. Any species that continued fighting would face sanctions. It was the first time in a century the assembly had intervened in an active conflict. Ralph received the order to withdraw and felt rage burn through him. He had the firepower to finish this, assembly or no assembly. But his fleet was fractured, his ships damaged, and the rebels were protecting the settlement he was supposed to conquer. "Commander," his second-in-command said quietly, "we have lost, not militarily but politically. If we continue, the Empire faces isolation. The cost is too high." Ralph knew it was true. He could destroy Outpost Trell, but it would cost Carthene everything. Their economy depended on galactic trade. Sanctions would cripple them. "All ships," he transmitted, the words tasting like poison. "Cease fire, withdraw to Rally Point Gamma." The loyalist Carthene ships powered down weapons and began retreating. They looked defeated despite superior numbers. The rebel ships, led by Dren, broadcast on open channels. "We request asylum at Outpost Trell. We cannot return to the Empire. We ask for sanctuary." Governor Murphy didn't hesitate. "Asylum granted. You'll find the Valrine understand what it means to lose a homeworld, and humans understand standing up for what's right despite the cost." As the battle ended, defenders returned to Outpost Trell. Ships were damaged, people were injured, but they had survived. More than survived, they had won. But the real victory wasn't military. Rebecca stood on the observation deck with Lena and Pella, watching Carthene rebel ships approaching for asylum. 7 Carthene vessels," Lena said. "That's almost 1,000 officers and crew who chose conscience over empire." "They'll need homes," Pella added. "Education about living in a free society, time to heal." "Sounds familiar," Rebecca smiled. 15 years ago, we took in Valrine refugees, taught them about humanity, learned from them. Now we do the same with Carthene." Governor Murphy addressed the settlement that evening. "Today, we proved that compassion is strength, that standing together matters more than military might. We welcomed Valrine refugees 15 years ago. Today, we welcome Carthene refugees. Tomorrow, perhaps others." Dren stood among the asylum seekers, listening. He had lost everything. His rank, his career, his place in Carthene society. But watching human and Valrine citizens work together to help his people, he realized he had gained something more valuable. "Officer Dren," a voice said. It was Pella. "Welcome to Outpost Trell. We know what it's like to lose a home, but we also know how to build a new one." Across the galaxy, the news spread. Species that had watched the battle began questioning their own policies. If humans and Valrine could create such unity, if even Carthene officers could choose morality over orders, then perhaps the old ways of doing things needed to change. The Luminous Collective announced reforms to their non-interference doctrine. The Torvan Republic proposed new assembly regulations protecting refugees. 3 minor species opened their borders to asylum seekers. In the Galactic Assembly, Ambassador Tanaka was appointed to a special committee on interspecies cooperation. The same body that had once threatened humanity with sanctions now sought their guidance. On Outpost Trell, construction began on new housing for Carthene refugees. Human engineers worked alongside Valrine designers and Carthene laborers, 3 species building together. Ralph sat alone in his quarters on the journey back to the Empire. He had failed his mission, but he couldn't shake the image of those defenders. Humans and Valrine fighting side by side, dying for each other, protecting something he had been ordered to destroy. For the first time in his career, he wondered if he had been serving the wrong ideals. The galaxy was changing, and it had started with one simple choice 15 years ago: humanity refusing to let the Valrine die alone. 20 years after the Valrine rescue, Outpost Trell had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A true multi-species civilization. The settlement now hosted humans, Valrine, Carthene, Torvan, and representatives from a dozen other species, all living as genuine equals. Pella, now Chief Ambassador for Integrated Communities, walked through the central plaza with her daughter. The child was half human, a biological impossibility that Valrine and human scientists had achieved together through careful genetic harmonization. She represented a future the galaxy had never imagined. Ambassador Pella, a young Carthene, approached. He wore the simple clothes of a teacher, nothing like the military uniform he had once worn. "I wanted to thank you, my students, human, Valrine, and Carthene children. They learn together now. It's beautiful." Pella smiled. "Thank you, Dren. Your courage 20 years ago helped make this possible." Dren had become a symbol of redemption, the officer who chose conscience over empire. Now he educated the next generation about the importance of standing for what's right. The Galactic Assembly had transformed dramatically. The old non-interference doctrines had been replaced by compassion protocols. Species facing extinction could now request aid without political penalties, and that aid was guaranteed by collective agreement. Ambassador Tanaka, now elderly but still sharp, presented the latest success story. The Myral species faced atmospheric collapse 6 months ago. Using protocols established after Outpost Trell, 17 species contributed to rescue operations. We saved 2.8 million Myral citizens. Total casualties, 43, all volunteers who knew the risks. The assembly chamber erupted in approval. This was the 49th successful rescue since the protocols were established. The Carthene Empire itself had undergone revolution. Inspired by Dren and the other asylum seekers, a reform movement had swept through their society. They opened their historical archives, acknowledged the Arendi debt, and began restructuring their entire civilization around principles of mutual aid rather than conquest. The new Carthene ambassador, a reformer named Sella, addressed the assembly. "My people spent centuries believing strength meant domination. The humans and Valrine showed us that true strength is compassion. We are grateful for that lesson." On Earth, Rebecca Stone sat in her garden, now in her 70s. Her granddaughter, named Myrth after the Valrine scholar who had sacrificed herself, played nearby with Valrine and Carthene children. The kids spoke a mixed language, pulling words from all 3 cultures. Lena visited her mother with news. "The great archives are being expanded again. We're adding an entire section on multi-species integration techniques. Universities across the galaxy are requesting access." "Knowledge freely shared," Rebecca said, "just like the Valrine always believed it should be." The Luminous Collective had undergone their own transformation. Serene, now a senior diplomat, had led reforms that ended their policy of pure observation. They now actively work to prevent species extinctions and mediate conflicts. "Observation without action is complicity," Serene often said. "We learned that from watching Outpost Trell." But the most profound changes were personal. Across the galaxy, Species that had never interacted beyond trade now formed genuine partnerships, mixed crews on ships, collaborative research teams, even a few marriages between species that scientists had managed to make biologically compatible. The human Valrine model had inspired revolution in what galactic civilization could mean. On the anniversary of the First Carthene battle, Outpost Trell held a memorial service. They honored those who had died defending the settlement, but also the Carthene officers who had chosen mutiny over following immoral orders. Governor Murphy, preparing to retire, gave one final speech. 20 years ago, we stood here facing impossible odds. We survived not because we were strong, but because we were united. That lesson changed the galaxy. She looked across the crowd. Humans standing with Valrine, Carthene beside Torvin, species that had once been enemies now raising families together. The galaxy operates differently now. When the Ceral species faced solar radiation poisoning last year, 42 species contributed to building them new habitats. When the Venturi homeworld was struck by asteroids, rescue ships arrived within days. This is the future that began when humanity refused to let the Valrine die alone. In the Carthene Empire's capital, a monument was unveiled. It depicted an Arendi figure and a human standing side by side. The inscription read, "They saved us, we forgot, may we never forget again." The great archives, now hosted across multiple worlds to ensure preservation, contain something extraordinary, a complete record of every species' contributions to galactic knowledge. Human innovation, Valrine theory, Carthene engineering, Torvin art, all freely accessible. Pella's daughter asked the question children always ask. "Mama, why did Grandmother Meyerth stay behind when the son died?" Pella knelt beside her child. Because she understood that survival isn't enough. The young needed to live to build something new. She gave her life so that future could exist, so that you could exist. Was she scared? Probably, Pella admitted. But she did it anyway. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. The Galactic Assembly established the Meyerth Prize, awarded annually to individuals who demonstrated exceptional compassion across species lines. The first recipient was Captain Rebecca Stone. The second was Officer Dren. The third was Serene of the Luminous Collective. Earth itself had transformed. Once considered a backwater world with primitive inhabitants, it was now recognized as a moral center of galactic civilization. Human philosophy about the inherent value of all sapient life had spread across hundreds of worlds. As Pella prepared for another assembly session, she received an urgent message. A new species, the Curil, had sent a distress call. Their son was dying exactly like the Valrines had. They needed help. The response was overwhelming. 47 species offered aid. Ships were already being prepared. The Curil would not face extinction alone. Pella smiled. This was the galaxy humanity and the Valrine had helped create. A civilization that responded to suffering with compassion rather than indifference. That evening she stood on the observation deck of Outpost Trell with Lena, watching ships prepare for the Curil rescue. "Your mother saved my people," Pella said. "Now we save others, the cycle continues." "It's not a cycle," Lena replied. "It's a wave, each act of compassion spreads, touches more. Lives inspires more kindness. We don't know where it ends because it doesn't end." 20 years ago, humanity had risked everything to save 40,000 Valrine refugees. That single choice had created ripples that transformed galactic civilization. Species that had operated on cold pragmatism for millennia now understood that compassion was not weakness. It was the foundation of true strength. The Carthene learned to remember their debts. The Luminous Collective learned to act. The Assembly learned to prioritize life over politics. And dozens of species learned that cooperation created possibilities impossible alone. Rebecca Stone, in her final years, watched all this unfold from her garden on Earth. Sometimes Valrine scholars visited, or Carthene reformers, or humans who had been children when the rescue happened. They all asked the same question: Why did humanity save the Valrine when no one else would? Rebecca's answer was always simple. Because it was the right thing to do, because we remembered when they helped us during the plague years, because we believe that civilization is measured not by power but by compassion. On the anniversary of the Valrine homeworld's destruction, every species in the assembly observed a moment of silence. They remembered the Valrine who died. They honored the humans who saved the survivors. They acknowledged the Arendi who had been forgotten. And they renewed their commitment to the compassion protocols, ensuring no species would face extinction alone ever again. Pella's daughter, young Myrth, attended her first assembly session at age 12. She watched representatives from across the galaxy work together on rescue operations, humanitarian missions, and collaborative research. "Is this what the galaxy was always like?" she asked. "No," Pella told her daughter honestly. "This is what the galaxy became, because your great-grandmother believed knowledge should be shared, because Rebecca Stone believed lives should be saved, because enough people chose compassion over convenience." The galaxy had learned a simple truth. Strength without compassion is tyranny. Knowledge without wisdom is empty. And civilization is measured not by what a species can destroy, but by what they choose to save. Humanity had aided the Valrine when they needed it most. The Valrine had aided humanity long before that. And together, they had shown the galaxy what was possible when species chose to become family rather than remaining strangers. That changed fate forever,